more from Barry's scrap wood. First job is to work on the stem, and I'm still using the same scraps of wood that Barry gave me from UKIS here, and I'm also going to have what will be my first successful attempt at inside out turning. All 4 pieces are just loosely glued together and held together by tape. Left them for about half an hour before I put them on the lathe. I first did the inside turning that I needed, broke them all apart with an ordinary wood chisel, and then started gluing them all back together again. When putting them all back together, I'm just being careful for the glue spill out, just to try and keep that as minimal as possible. And once everything's all back together again, it's on with the skew just to do some very, very basic shaping, and I'm taking it down very, very slowly here. Once all the shaping's done, I'm cutting a couple of tenons on each end, and that will be for where it sits into the base and for the actual lampshade is going to attach. Once the stem is done, it's on to cutting all the segment pieces for the lampshade. Now, every single row on here is going to be the same size, so every piece is being cut at 9.2 millimeters. See closely here that every single piece really does have these fuzzies on, and that's why then the next process is to sand all 6 sides of every single piece, which does take a little bit of time, but it's so much more worthwhile in the long run. That's really all the preparation work. Next job, I'm using slabs of Sapele here, and I think I've just cut the corners off on the bandsaw, hot glued it to a waste block, and this will be the top and bottom ring for the lampshade. I'm also working with a proper plan here of how I want to lay all these pieces out. So I'm using my 72 hole indexing ring here. Every piece goes on at 20 degrees, and as before in the previous projects, it's a small amount of piece of glue just to smear over your piece. Push it on and hold it in place for 15 seconds. After that, go straight on to your next piece. Once you've done a whole ring, leave it for 15 minutes, and then you can either sand it or turn it to whichever you need to do. You'll also notice that whenever I put the last piece in on the ring, I'm having to move my table back out the way because the plywood is too thick, so I manually have to put it in place, and it goes in really, really well. You can, because these pieces are so tight, you can actually eye it up properly. This was the first mistake, and I used the scraper to try and tidy these up a bit, and it just blew out a couple of the pieces. And then moments later, and I can't remember how this happened, I got another catch where I had about 6 or 8 pieces fly out. You'll also see that I've had to put some original Iroko pieces in. They just fly off somewhere in the workshop and you just never see them again. Just trying to take it steady as you do the insides. If you try and be too vicious with your cuts, then you are then likely to get more catches and bits flying out, however easy they are to really stick back in. This is now the first, what will be the bottom part of the lampshade done. All the inside is finished. To fix this to the stem, I'm going to make a small Sapele ring. After that, I'm going to make some small, effectively like pins, to glue into the side of the lampshade. This piece here was turned down to 3mm thick, and it was about just over 100mm long, and you can really see the flex in it. I then just cut them all to length using a coping saw. The pins themselves are glued into the lampshade, and that's all I've done. Then on the ring, I've drilled holes at 120 degrees so that hopefully everything should be fairly even. I didn't want to glue the actual ring in until I actually did the final assembly. Back to the original waste block with the Sapele that I used for the top ring, flatten it all off again, and this will then be for the top of the lampshade. Exactly the same process as before, 18 pieces per ring, working to my plan. I do get one or two of these wrong at some point, and it's really just a case of pulling them off, clean up where it's got to be glued onto, and then reattaching them again. Now when I worked on this one, I did actually get quite a bad catch, and I think there was 10 pieces flew out, and of those 10 pieces it took me about 5 minutes. I found 8 of them. Slight delay, 15-20 minutes just to glue them all back in, and then I was back up and running again. Compared to normal segmented work, I've got to say this is, to me, a lot quicker and easier to do. It seems to be more satisfying as well because you're constantly on the go. Before I join the two halves together, I'm trying to make sure that they're both exactly the same size inside. For the base, I'm using the same piece of wood again, and I've glued 7 lengths together to create one level, and then another 7 lengths to create a second level, which they will then be glued on top of each other at 90-degree angles, so that there's a crisscross on the grain pattern, which does cause a few issues with working with end grain. When the lampshade has fully dried, I've cut a small plywood ring just to act as a support on the end. For the outside turning, it's a case more of truing it up. That took the wall thickness down to about 3 to 4 mil thickness. And then parted it off from the Sapele in exactly the same way as I did the first half. Working on the base, just hot glued it onto a waste block again. Working on the underneath first, I'm creating a mortise in there, which is how I will hold onto my smaller shuck jaws. Then I'm drilling a hole through, which is where the stem will go through, and I've also had to effectively put a concave area inside the base there so that you've got room for the wires to manoeuvre once they come out of the bottom of the stem. At the top, the first priority really is when you put the stem in, just making sure that it fits nicely and doesn't show any gaps. For the electrics, I've used an old mobile phone charger which runs at 5 volts, and also some computer networking cable which is very much like telephone wire. I found running on the 5 volt I just needed a small resistor in there, so it's just stopped the LED from blowing. The networking cable, because it was going through the centre of the stem, first of all I wrapped this in ordinary black tape, and to be honest it really did look a bit of a mess. Now I knew I'd got to take all the electrics out. After I gave it the spray varnish and redid the wiring, I decided this time I'm going to find something that looks a little bit better. So I went indoors, found an old USB lead that's not used anymore, cut the ends off it and wired that in, and to me it looks a lot better. Hello there, it's Paul here and welcome along everyone. Just as the intro said, more from Barry's scrap piece of wood, and I still have a fair bit of this left, but I don't know what I'm going to do next. Now the interesting thing was that when I was doing my last segmented project, the one that looked a bit like an egg with a finial on top, I was halfway through it and I already had visions of making this, so I couldn't wait to get that one finished and start doing this one. And again, everything on this piece is from these, apart from the yellow piece of Iroko. I just wanted to give it some form of a pattern on there, and this time I didn't mess up on the pattern. I designed myself a proper pattern and I stuck to it all the way through. Now with all the rings being the same size, all the pieces can be quickly cut off in one go, all be sanded, just be left in piles, and was so much quicker to deal with. Once again, I think I had 2 catches on this one. Unlike the first segmented project where it was just flying off the lathe, this time it was literally a blowout of pieces. The big mistake I made was using the wrong tool for the wrong job. I think on this bottom half I lost probably maybe 2 or 3 pieces. One of the pieces just disappeared in the workshop. Never seen it since. The top ones, when I had that, I think I had 10 pieces fly out, and I think I found 8 of them, so I had to put two new pieces back in. Again, quickly and easily glued back together. 15 minutes and I was back on turning. When I glued the 2 halves together, because these pieces are so thin, the walls on here is about 3 to 4 mil thick, and because they are so thin, I did actually leave the piece overnight to cure properly. So another first for me. Here is my first success of the inside out turning. Now, I have tried this a couple of times in the past, more as practice pieces, not on an actual project, and they've just totally failed. This one, it was a case that when I cut 4 of these to create the stem, I thought, well, rather than glue them up totally to start with, I would certainly have a go at the inside out turning. If it failed, then I'd just cut some more and do it without it. Even the base, I decided to cut up a whole load of pieces, glue them all together in 2 halves, did a crisscross, so there's the whole issue of end grain everywhere, and I will say that the base actually turned out really well. For electrics wise, I mean, you'd see I was playing around with this bit. This is basically just computer networking cable, very much like telephone wire. Ideal for this sort of thing because it's so fine, and because of the inside out turning and the holes, that's why I opted to try and cover it in tape, and it just looks so messy. I decided to redo the cable, and what I found was a USB lead, and with the USB lead I just basically chopped off the ends, and it was an ideal cable and to me that really does look a lot nicer. For the main supply, I was initially going to start off with some AA batteries, and I've got two of these, and I thought, brilliant. I was trying to test it out with some rechargeable batteries, and then the main issue I had was this little control box I've got here for the electronics and the switch, was that these wouldn't have fitted in. So I then had to go off and think of something else, and that's when I came up with a telephone charger. If you're looking for a power supply for something like an LED, old phone chargers are usually ideal. They're usually 5 volts. I did have to put a small resistor in just to reduce the current a little bit, just to save the LED burning out. But again, if you're looking at doing something like this, go online, search for LED calculator, and you then get asked for various things. Now, I sanded the whole thing to 400 and didn't do anything else to it because I just decided that for ease, I would, for a finish, I'd just give it a coat of spray varnish. Now, for dimensions wise, the overall height here is 190 mil, which is about 7.5 inches. The diameter, I have actually done the base the same diameter as the shade, and for that it's 70 millimeters, which is 2 3/4 inches, and the height of the actual shade is just under 100 millimeters, which is 4 inches. It's very miniature. I think the size of these pieces really did dictate as to what size I could do. What I have found is that I've done an awful lot of miniature items like this in the past, and I think working on something on a miniature basis is actually a lot harder than working on something a lot bigger. So it really does test your skills. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next project video.